Season 16 of Doctor Who, also known as The Key to Time, was something that the show hadn't tried on such a scale and in a direct manner in its then 15-year history. An entire season dedicated to a larger story arc. 6 different stories, all keying into a larger narrative, as the Doctor is sent on a quest by the White Guardian to locate the 6 segments of the Key to Time. A challenging concept, but in the end, how did producer Graham Williams, script editor Anthony Reid, and Tom Baker himself, as well as the writers, pull it off in delivering an entertaining series for the fans? Let's take a closer look into Season 16 of Doctor Who. It's 1976, and Doctor Who is in its golden age, with producer Philip Hinchcliffe and script editor Robert Holmes putting together a series of stories influenced by the films of the golden era of Hollywood, as well as horror cinema, coupled with Tom Baker's mesmerising performances as the Doctor. This success was also reflected in the ratings that on average were the highest Doctor Who has ever been, even succeeding the early seasons of William Hartnell. But behind the scenes, the horror elements, coupled with the ever more apparent violence, had brought Doctor Who an enemy totally different to the Dalek Sidemen or the Master, perhaps more devastating. Critic Mary Whitehouse and the National Viewers and Listeners Association, who disapproved this approach to what was perceived as a children's TV show, and made their voice known to the BBC, who, despite the ratings successes, took this intervention as an opportunity to change things round on Doctor Who. Philip Hinchcliffe was moved on to the more adult-orientated police drama Target, and was replaced by Graham Williams, while script editor Robert Holmes stayed on for a while longer in order to help usher in his successor, Anthony Reid. Graham Williams took the helm for season 15 with the instruction from the BBC to make the show less scary and more light-hearted. From the off, it was full of problems including scripts, the relationship between Tom Baker and Leela actress Louise Jameson, the prop for newly established character K9, as well as budget issues. As a result, season 15 was widely regarded as a step down in quality from the previous 3 Fourth Doctor seasons, leaving Graham Williams to try something new for season 16. The concept for the Key to Time itself was something Graham Williams wanted to bring in for his debut season. However, Robert Holmes already had 3 scripts at the ready before his departure as script editor, leaving little or no time to rewrite these into Williams' concept, or ditching them in favour of 6 stories that fitted the narrative structure of the proposed story arc. Season 16 is, in fact, Graham Williams' first season that was his to develop entirely, and therefore providing him with the time with script editor Anthony Reid to set about the ideas and find writers both experienced and new to Doctor Who that could bring the idea to fruition. As for the story arc itself, it was pretty straightforward. The Doctor is assigned to travel time and space to obtain the 6 segments of the Key to Time, a device so powerful that it could stop time altogether. The mission was assigned to the Doctor by the eternal being known as the White Guardian, who seeks to use the device to balance the good and evil within the universe, whilst warning that his opposite counterpart, known as the Black Guardian, will try similar methods to obtain the Key to Time himself and cause chaos and destruction. The concept of a story arc wasn't something that hadn't been done before, and you could regard the Key to Time and structure itself as an extended narrative of the idea that was formed in the first Dot story, The Keys of Marinus, which followed a similar pattern with each episode focusing on a quest for the key. Loose story arcs have been in place before, such as the Season 8 narrative of the introduction of the Master and the Nervous Space Beacon stories from the Fourth Doctor's debut season, could both be regarded as story arcs too. However, these were never directly presented as story arcs itself, and acted as stories with a linked theme, as opposed to being part of a larger direct narrative. The Key to Time, however, was purposely designed to be an intentional story arc, with each story linked with the Doctor's quest to find the segments which were disguised, as well as playing a part in the larger narrative of the power struggle between the White Guardian and the Black Guardian, with some of the antagonists in the stories revealing or alluding to being an agent of the Black Guardian and being aware of the power the segments of the Key to Time possess. The final integral part to the Key to Time was the introduction of a new companion to fill the void left by Leela, who departed at the conclusion of the previous season story, The Invasion of Time. The production team took the opportunity to try something new with the companion format, with the introduction of Romana, a time lady who, like the Doctor, is from Gallifrey, and on face value seems to be equal in intellect whilst lacking the life experiences the Doctor possesses due to the sheltered life she has experienced on Gallifrey, with the additional factor of Romana being forced upon the Doctor by the White Guardian to assist with the search of the Key to Time. A different companion relationship is established, as the pair spend a lot of time trying to outdo each other in the intelligence stakes, all the while Romana adjusts to life outside of Gallifrey, which warms her relationship eventually to the Doctor. Technically as well, we are also introduced to K9 Mark II, which had been constructed by the Doctor. Fundamentally, it is still the K9 that was introduced during the previous season, with John Leeson still providing the voice, but the prop itself was new due to complications with the previous model interfering with technical equipment. The first story to the Key to Time season is the Ribos Operation, written by former script editor Robert Holmes. A large part of episode 1 is dedicated to the introduction of the White Guardian, explaining the importance of the Key to Time, and the arrival of Romana, who provides the locator used to establish the coordinates of the planet the segment is located on, the addition of acting as a sort of homing device. For the actual main narrative, the Doctor and Romana land on the planet of Ribos and find themselves involved in a caper involving the lovable conman Garon and his understudy Unstoff, who are attempting to swindle the exiled tyrant Graf Vindicay into buying the whole planet that isn't actually theirs to sell, and fabricate a story of the planet being in abundance of a rare mineral known as Jeffrick, which the conmen planted in the crown jewels of the planet. The Doctor and Romana become more involved when they work out that the piece of Jeffrick is actually the first segment to the Key to Time. This is a strong story to kick off the season and showcases one of Robert Holmes' talents, which is strong character writing. This was something he always applied to the stories he either wrote or script edited, but sometimes played second fiddle to the horror-themed elements during the first half of the Fourth Doctor's tenure. This allows for a script of witty and rich dialogue as Holmes applies another one of his traits in establishing character double acts. We already have the Doctor and Romana, as previously mentioned, trying to outdo each other on the intelligence stakes, but you also have the master and apprentice relationship between Garon and Unstoff, and the comrades in arms relationship between the antagonist Graf Vindicay and his head of personal guard, Sholak. On top of this, Robert Holmes also gives depth to some of the minor characters, in particular the character of Binro, a tramp who was a leading scientist on the planet before being ousted as a heretic for claiming that the planet orbits a star and the other stars and planets exist throughout the universe. The character itself is rather minor to the narrative and only appears briefly, but due to Holmes' writing you are completely drawn into his story and further feel saddened by his demise. Being entirely studio-bound, the story relies heavily on effective sets, with Ribos replicating a medieval world laden in snow, which comes across as effective, but also highlights one of the issues regarding the Graham Williams tenure as producer, which I'll come to later on. In all, the Ribos Operation is a fun story with strong characters and the ideal start to the Key to Time. The second story to the Key to Time is The Pirate Planet, which was also Douglas Adams' first contribution to Doctor Who. Following on from the success of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy debut earlier in the year on BBC Radio, Adams weaves a narrative blend of witty comedy coupled with some clever science fiction concepts. The traitor reveals the location of the second segment to the Key to Time on a cold, inhospitable planet of Gallifreyan. However, the TARDIS brings the Doctor, Romana and K9 to the planet of Zanak, which is in the location Gallifreyan should have been in. Once there, they come across the inhabitants who tell stories about the stars shifting in the skies and treating precious stones and minerals as mere trinkets that lie in the street, and how grateful they are to their captain. The captain himself dictates over the planet from his mountaintop base, and despite his seemingly generous nature, he actually comes across as a tyrannical bully who oppresses outside visitors and the zombie-like looking monks, the Mentiads, whose telepathic abilities pose a threat to the captain in his operations. With each new telepathic recruit, they add to their numbers. Eventually, the Doctor deduces that the whole planet is actually hollowed out and has the ability to transport itself across the galaxy, engulfing planets before extracting their mineral wealth, with the most recent victim being Gallifreyan, which the Doctor deduces is the second segment to the Key to Time. However, the Doctor also discovers that there is something more to the captain in his operations when he discovers Zanak's long-thought-dead Queen Xanxia hidden away in the mountain base. At first glance, The Pirate Planet seems like a straightforward story of an oppressive, tyrannical figure lording over his planet, coupled with some intentionally over-the-top characterization and acting in the story, in particular from actor Bruce Purchase, who plays the captain. The captain is loud, bad-tempered and angry, which is what you expect from the character, but it is merely a charade not only to the other characters in the story, but to us as an audience as well, when his ulterior motives are finally revealed in the great interplay of dialogue he holds with the Doctor, of two eccentric characters trying to outwit each other without revealing their own intellectual abilities. The narrative slowly peels away this plot twist, as with the character of the captain's private nurse becoming more prevalent in the narrative, and the twist finally being revealed in the finale. The interplay between the Doctor and Romana carries on from the Ribos Operation, with Romana still attempting to outsmart the Doctor, as well as upstaging him by using her looks to get information from the locals. K9 also gets a prolonged involvement in the story, in particular with him facing off the Captain's own robotic pet, the parrot Polyphase Avatron. As for the guest characters, there is a heavy mix of overacting from many of them, with mixed results, but in my opinion the Captain's right-hand man, Mr. Fibuli, who endures the brunt of the Captain's temper, comes out as the most memorable. Director Pennant Roberts also makes good use of the location shooting, with Berkeley Power Station in Gloucestershire doubling up as the Captain's engine room, and various mine locations in Wales used to represent how Zanuck mines the mineral wealth out of other planets. Coupled together with Douglas Adams' script, The Pirate Planet is a story that is a lot more deeper than you initially expect. It is a contender for being arguably the best story of the Key to Time season, and one of the dark horses of Tom Baker's tenure as the Doctor. The third story of the season is The Stones of Blood, which, like The Pirate Planet, was a debut story from a writer who would be a regular contributor to the remainder of the Tom Baker era, David Fisher. The Tracer brings the TARDIS to contemporary Earth in the English county of Cornwall, and eventually the pair run into archaeologist Professor Amelia Rumford and her assistant Vivian Fay, who are studying a stone circle known as the Nine Travellers. The same circle is also used by some hostile druids who worship the Celtic goddess the Cailleach, and feed some of the stones blood, who turn out to be silicon-based lifeforms known as the Ogre and can move around. Before too long, the Doctor realises that the stone circle is also a marker point for a space prison occupying the same area in hyperspace, and that a convicted criminal has escaped. The Doctor works out that the escaped criminal is impersonating the Cailleach, controlling the Ogre, and is in possession of the third segment of the Key to Time, and has learnt how to manipulate its power. Stones of Blood is literally a story of two halves that summarises the Fourth Doctor era so far. Episodes 1 and 2 feel like a throwback to the Philip Hinchcliffe era, with a contemporary Earth setting and folk horror influence providing the eerie feel, as well as the plot device of a criminal alien impersonating a god and using their followers to their advantage, in a manner similar to Sutekh in Pyramids of Mars and Magnus Greel in the towns of Wen Chiang, as well as the Doctor being more serious as he had been more recently. The second half of the story is set mostly on the prison ship, and feels more in tune with the Graham Williams era, with a more science fiction heavy influence, such as the previously mentioned hyperspace theory and the biomechanical justice machines, Megara, as well as the Fourth Doctor's more comedic persona. You could argue this pales in comparison to the first part of the story. The guest cast is fairly small in this story too, which allows better character development to those vital to narrative progression. Firstly, there is a progression in the relationship between the Doctor and Romana, where he seems more trusting of her to the point he feels it right to reveal to her that it wasn't the Lord President of Gallifrey that sent her on the assignment, but the White Guardian impersonating him. She still shows moments of being naive, in particular her poor choice of footwear when arriving on the Earth, but it is less about her and the Doctor trying to outsmart each other and more working as a team. The characterisation in this story, you could argue, is a great example in Doctor Who of strong female characters. We already have Romana progressing as a character, but you also have Professor Rumford, played by Beatrix Lehman, who at times upstages Tom Baker's portrayal of the Doctor in regards to her eccentricity. Additionally, you also have the character of Vivian Fay, who, as the story progresses, is more three-dimensional in character than previously expected, and more vital to the story as you previously thought, in a similar manner to the nurse character in The Pirate Planet. Graham Williams' era does tend to create strong roles for female characters as both protagonist and antagonist, and you could argue that Stones of Blood is the best example of this. The narrative overall is fairly vague, with not too much time dwelled upon searching for the third segment of the Key to Time in comparison to the previous two stories. Also, the main driver and the antagonist in the narrative, who turns out to be called Cesar Diplos, is not to take over a planet, galaxy or universe, or to create mass genocide, but more merely a criminal in hiding, seemingly out of desperation, and is willing to kill or let others do it for them in order to hide their true identity. On the whole, I feel this is actually a good thing, given that the initially thought main antagonist, the Ogre, although interesting as a concept, are very limited and basic. Technically, The Stones of Blood also stands out with the way it's filmed. Director Darrell Blake opted to film the location scenes on video cameras as opposed to 16mm cameras that was the standard. Although this procedure had been used before in Doctor Who, it was a conscious decision by the director, who was irritated by the jarring effect of 1970s British television when scenes cut from a studio to a location or vice versa, and a different type of camera is being used. Although some argue it cheapens the overall look, I feel it helped add to the narrative with a slightly blurred feel to the image, adding to that eerie feel of the Earth set scenes and the story. Overall, The Stones of Blood is an interesting story, and indeed one of two halves, although you could argue that the light nature to parts of the narrative is both limited and refreshing at the same time. Some fans consider this one of the strongest stories of the season, and whilst I mostly agree, I feel its appreciation is among certain circles of fans is somewhat romanticised due to its throwback feel to the more popular Philip Hinchcliffe era of the Fourth Doctor's tenure. The fourth story to the Key to Time is The Android to Tara, which once again was written by David Fisher, who became only the third writer in Doctor Who history to write a consecutive second story straight after their debut, after Ian Stewart Black with The Savages and the War Machines, and Chris Boucher with The Face of Evil and The Robots of Death. With this story, there is a completely different approach in capturing the segments of the Key to Time, perhaps to stop the stories becoming formulaic. The Doctor has become seemingly bored with the hunt, and when the TARDIS lands on the planet of Tara, he sends Romana on the hunt for the segment while he goes fishing. Upon finding the segment, which is disguised as part of a statue, she gets captured by the suave yet devious Count Grendel, who mistakes Romana for an android duplicate of Princess Strella, who he also holds captive. Meanwhile, the Doctor finds himself assisting Prince Reinhardt in attending his own coronation, with the use of an android duplicate as a decoy, as Grendel is trying to prevent this from happening in order to get the crown for himself by marrying Princess Strella by using Romana as a doppelganger. The Android to Tara has a very fairy tale feel about it in both style and narrative. The medieval-like setting is complemented with the location shooting taking place at Leeds Castle, complete with the production team exploiting the BBC's costume department by dressing the guest characters in outfits you'd expect from a historical drama. In addition, you also get a pseudo-science fiction mix with the involvement of android development technology and swords and sabers capable of producing an electrical charge, which is vaguely reminiscent of the Star Wars lightsabers. The narrative itself leans heavily on Anthony Hope's 1894 novel The Prisoner of Zenda, which centres around the plot of using a doppelganger to pose as a king for his coronation. Depending on your point of view, this either cheapens your view of the Android to Tara or enriches it. However, it isn't the only time Doctor Who has based its narrative on existing literature. Overall, The Android to Tara is a story that is very easy on the eye and unthreatening to the suspense of the lead characters. The ploy of getting the search for the Key to Time out of the way in the opening 10 minutes is a refreshing change and allows the narrative to not be too involved in the overall story arc and can act as a story all of its own. Even though Romana is central to the narrative in regards to getting kidnapped and being used as a doppelganger for Count Grendel's schemes, the character doesn't have much direct involvement in the overall narrative and is separated from the Doctor for the most part of the story. This could be contributed, however, to Mary Tamm's heavy involvement in having to play three characters. Tom Baker as the Doctor largely plays the narrative by numbers and seemingly is able to second-guess all the characters and instantly has a plan for all eventualities, while simultaneously showing a bit of fun in his variety of skills down to his sword fighting, which is reminiscent more of the Third Doctor. From my own point of view, I can never decide if the Android to Tara is constructed as a means of a filler, with the production team wanting something different from the rest of the season and being potentially short on viable ideas, and therefore lean on David Fisher to submit this work, which in turn relies heavily on the Prisoner of Zenda. The character of Count Grendel for me steals the show with his over-the-top fun villainy, with actor Peter Jeffrey playing up the suave, treacherous character, whilst also not taking the part too seriously. In the end, this reflects on how I view the Android to Tara. Nothing too serious and very light-hearted, but at the same time good fun, which is at times what Doctor Who needs to be. The penultimate story of the Key to Time is The Power of Kroll, which was writer Robert Holmes' second contribution to the season. Set on a swampy moon of the planet Delta Magna, the Doctor and Romana become caught in the middle of the workers of a methane refinery, who are trialling a new system that could take over the entire moon, and the indigenous people known as Swampies, who have been supplied arms by the gunrunner Rome Dutt in a bid to attack the refinery. In the meantime, the Doctor and Romana discover that the Swampies worship a giant squid creature called Kroll, who has swallowed the fifth segment to the Key to Time and could wipe out everyone on the moon. The Power of Kroll is certainly an ambitious story, with script editor Anthony Reid setting the remit to writer Robert Holmes to include the biggest monster ever seen in Doctor Who, and although not a fan of working under that kind of structure for a script, He nevertheless delivered a narrative which was the inclusion of such a creature, with realisation, like much of the narrative of Power of Kroll, was very dependent on the use of budget. Location shooting for the story was stretched up to 9 days, including 2 nighttime shoots, which wasn't the standard for Doctor Who, but in this case allowed director Norman Stewart to make the maximum use of the marshland around the River Ald in Suffolk to give a better degree of authenticity to the story's place on an alien world, but it was a refreshing change from the usual resorting to quarries which Doctor Who was renowned for. As for the imagery of the creature Kroll, split-screen technology was used to give off its size on location shooting, whilst a model version was used for the studio sets around the refinery. Some studio shots were done for the surface scenes on Delta Magna, primarily involving the areas where the Swampies held their prisoners. The majority of the studio work was set aside for the scenes at the refinery. This is one of the biggest letdowns of the story, and it seems to be a victim of lack of budget at this point of the season, resulting in a cheaply designed, very wobbly set that was supposed to reflect a state-of-the-art refinery, but instead is very poorly realised. The reaction from the set designs was so poorly received by the BBC hierarchy that head of serials Graham MacDonald demanded that designer Don Giles never worked on Doctor Who again. Strangely for a Robert Holmes' story, the characterisation of the Power of Kroll isn't very strong. Romana for the most part is reduced to a damsel in distress role, with some of the characters are formulaic and basic, which is a missed opportunity given the experience of actors in the story who have appeared in Doctor Who before, such as John Abernethy, Philip Maddock and Neil McCarthy. However, one redeeming feature is John Leeson, better known as the voice of K9, given his only screen role in Doctor Who as the technician Dugeen, which was made possible due to the original actor dropping out, and due to the lengthy location shooting. This meant K9 was written out of the story, leaving John Leeson originally without a part to play. This is also a typical example of Tom Baker's acting abilities portraying the Doctor, upping the quality of the story overall. Playing the role a bit more straighter than other stories, he quickly outsmarts and outthinks the workers by dismissing the technology of the refinery and claiming he's seen better, but still maintaining his tomfoolery and alien-like mannerisms, such as in putting a drink in his pocket, which I can't decide if this was Tom Baker improvising or something that shouldn't have been caught on camera. Despite the limitations of budget and missed opportunities mentioned so far in the Power of Kroll, there are many interesting ideas included by Robert Holmes in an attempt to raise it above a basic monster story. Kroll is limited in its appearance until most of the last episode when it starts rampaging, effectively reducing the character as a narrative hook, whilst the real antagonists of the story are revealed. Among them you have the misguided swampy tribal leader Ranquin, whose blind faith and devotion out of Kroll leads other characters to an unnecessary death. Then you have the gunrunner Rome Dutt, who is clearly an antagonist from the off, who provides a story to the Swampies that is supplying their arms courtesy of an unseen organisation from Delta Magna known as the Sons of Earth, with the reasoning of them letting liberate themselves from the menace of the refinery. However, the poor quality of the weapons quickly establishes that the assault on the refinery was never going to happen. This then brings us to the leader of the refinery, Thorn, who initially comes across as a generous man to his team, and with bold ambitions of hatred of the Swampies whose existence stands in the way of progress of more refineries being installed on the moon. From there you are very quick to establish that Thorn has ulterior motives and is more involved in the disposal of the Swampies as initially thought. Overall, the story has some underpinning themes regarding ecology, racism and colonialism, which is something you expect more from another Doctor Who writer, Malcolm Hulke, who often provided thought-provoking narratives. Despite all this depth and determination to limit the appearance of Kroll to allow for more devastating effect, the Power of Kroll's narrative overall generally feels slow and pedestrian, and only really gathers speed towards the story's finale. Robert Holmes admitted that out of all his contributions to Doctor Who, this was his least favourite, and didn't end up submitting another story for almost 6 years. Despite his disdain for the Power of Kroll, Robert Holmes clearly thought some of the ideas developed here were worthy of being recycled for future stories, which is what he did when he returned to Doctor Who in 1984's The Caves of Androzani, which reused the ideas of gun running and smuggling, as well as an antagonist playing two factions off each other in the name of profit and progress. The final story of the Key to Time season is the Armageddon Factor, written by 1970s regulars Bob Baker and Dave Martin, which turned out to be their final contribution as a writing duo for Doctor Who. The final segment is located on the planet of Atrios, which is locked in a nuclear war with its twin Zeos. The war effort is being overseen by ambitious Marshall, while the planet's Princess Astra is more eager to orchestrate a peace deal with the Zeos. Upon the Doctor and Romana's arrival, They are quickly accused of being involved with Princess Astra's sudden disappearance, who is linked to the sixth segment of the Key to Time. Before too long, they discover someone is controlling the Marshal, and Zeos is deserted, with a war effort controlled by a computer. Additionally, the mysterious Shadow, an agent of the Black Guardian, is operating the war from a hidden location in preparation of the Doctor's arrival with the 5 segments of the Key to Time. For the majority of the Fourth Doctor's tenure, the final story of the season was reserved for the solitary six-parter, which is the case for the Armageddon Factor. But additionally, because of the 2 extra episodes, there was a lot of expectation that the story should be the strongest or at least one of the strongest of the season. Unfortunately, the Armageddon Factor falls short of that expectation. The narrative itself is an ambitious space opera of epic storylines that is influenced by Star Wars. However, like the previous story, The Power of Kroll, the realisation of what we can achieve with the available budget make the ideas that would have been thought of by Baker and Martin unachievable or unrealistic. The story is entirely filmed in the studio, with the sets for the story being the war room, hospital ward, and various corridors on Atrios, with its bleak appearance to give off the impression of a planet suffering the effects of war. Zeos is also exclusively brighter lit corridors and a room for a battle computer Mentalis. Shadow's domain is darkly lit cave-like passages, which, like the other 2 settings, is basic in design. In addition to this, as a viewer, the space battles that are talked about are only observed on a radar screen, as opposed to seeing ships fight it out, which is frustrating in terms of being a factor that could have heavily contributed to the narrative, but once again, isn't possible with the budget. Then there is the narrative itself. The Doctor very quickly works things out regarding the Shadow's hidden lair, the Marshal being controlled, and Princess Astra's link to the 6th segment to the Key to Time. Due to this, the progress of the narrative moves along very quickly for the first 3 episodes, and then becomes very slow. As such, many of the characters become redundant, and various ideas have to be written in, so rather than them suddenly disappearing. Examples of this include the Marshal being kept in a time loop for half the story during its final assault on Zeos. Astra's surgeon lover Merak spends half the story wandering the corridors of Zeos looking for Astra, only to get injured and end up back on Atrios. Even K9 spends time on a conveyor towards a furnace and then wandering corridors. In short, the narrative is overstretched, coupled with characters who aren't engaged enough to cover the allotted 6 episodes, which disrupts the flow of the story, and in hindsight you wonder if a 4-episode slot would have helped out the story more. Despite the limitations of characters such as the Marshal and Merak, there are some redeeming characters in the Armageddon Factor. Firstly, you have the main antagonist, the Shadow, played by veteran actor William Squire, who plays the role with darkness and mystery, with a serious nature that grates against the Doctor's tomfoolery when the 2 characters clash. Romana, by the time the Armageddon Factor arrives, has fully developed in confidence for her character and no longer gives off the naive or fish-out-of-water nature, and starts to act more as the Doctor's equal, and in this case starts to take on his lines and quotes that you would expect him to deliver. For comic relief, you have the character of Drax, who turns out to be an old Time Lord friend of the Doctor's from their youthful days at the Academy. However, he is very un-Time Lord-like compared to the Doctor and any other Time Lord who has appeared in Doctor Who so far, with his rogue nature. As it turns out, his skills have been put to use by the Shadow under duress to arrange a war between Atrios and Zeos. Finally, you have the long-awaited appearance of the Black Guardian, who have been talked about throughout the entire season, and we finally get a glimpse in the finale, as he attempts to trick the Doctor in handing over the completed Key to Time by posing as his compatriot, the White Guardian. The character is played by another veteran actor, Valentine Dial, who is renowned for his vocal delivery, in particular on radio, and had a degree of menace in all too brief appearance. And you feel that the character should have played a larger role in the Armageddon Factor, given that the threat he carried over the overall quest. The Key to Time season was broadcast from the 2nd of September 1978 to the 24th of February 1979, averaging at approximately 8.6 million viewers on original broadcast, which was marginally down from the previous season 15, and at the time was the lowest average viewing figures for a season in the 4th Doctor era. But out of all of the 26 seasons of the classic era, The Key to Time ranks at number 10. The season overall marked a sort of changing of the guard moment, with, as previously mentioned, Robert Holmes' long association writing stories with Doctor Who came to a halt until 1984, and the writing duo of Bob Baker and Dave Martin submitting their last story as a partnership, although Bob Baker would provide one story on his own in the following season with The Nightmare of Eden. Additionally, Anthony Reid would depart as script editor and hand over to Douglas Adams, who would exert his comedic style and influence onto the following season. To prepare for this role, he would provide uncredited script editing duties on the Armageddon Factor, as well as writing the closing scene. In front of the camera, Mary Tamm decided that she would leave the role of Romana after just the one season, as she thought the character had reverted to a typical companion role and felt she couldn't take it any further. Fortunately, with the character being a time lady, the option was there to change her appearance with a regeneration. As a result, Lalla Ward, who played Princess Astra in the Armageddon Factor, took on the role of regenerated Romana from the following season until the character's departure in 1981. John Leeson, who provided the voice of K9, also opted not to return for the following season, and as such the robotic dog was voiced during season 17 by David Briley. John Leeson would return to the role for season 18 on the promise that it would be written out, which it was, later on in 1981. This would also be the first known occasion when Tom Baker was considering leaving the show, and it is rumoured that he offered to resign at the end of season 16, which was flatly refused. This would become a common trend until he left the role as well in 1981. Although the Black Guardian was underused for the Key to Time, the character would get more screen presence during season 20, when he returned for what is now known as the Black Guardian trilogy, when he blackmailed the new companion Turlo into trying to assassinate the Doctor. And although I don't feel it's as strong as the Key to Time, it is good to see a character with potential get more involvement, although you feel that even now, both the Black and White Guardian have something more to offer to Doctor Who. In my opinion, the Key to Time proves that the story arc concepts across a whole season works, and the experiment, despite being slightly down in ratings, was a success. Unfortunately, in my opinion, the formula wasn't successfully executed for a season-long story arc again in the classic series. There are plenty of mini-arcs such as the E-Space trilogy and the aforementioned Black Guardian trilogy, but the only other full-season story arc, The Trial of a Time Lord, falls way short of what was achieved in the Key to Time. Fortunately, since the show was revived in 2005, the approach, ambition and commitment to story arcs has been worked better, although you could argue that the concept fits more in modern-day television. I also think it's the strongest season out of the three that were made with Graham Williams as producer. Season 15 suffered from major issues, including the trying to steer away from the successful but controversial Philip Hinchcliffe era, whilst dealing with the massive budget cuts that hit the visual quality of the show, as well as last-minute additions, including the season 15 finale, The Invasion of Time, which wasn't an original idea. Season 17, that followed the Key to Time, was very successful in the ratings, but that was at the detriment of the strikes ongoing on rival channel ITV, and the quality of stories noticeably dropped, with Graham Williams struggling to contain Tom Baker's influence, which would have been reinforced by the humour that Douglas Adams injected into the show, which ultimately created an overall drop in quality. In my own opinion, my two favourite stories from the Graham Williams era are The Horror of Fan Rock and City of Death, and I'm aware that neither of them are part of the Key to Time season. However, Horror of Fan Rock is a hangover from the Philip Hinchcliffe era by maintaining a lot of the ideologies of the era, and City of Death is a rare example of Douglas Adams' highbrow humour working well with the narrative coupled with the glamour location shooting in Paris. The reason I feel that the Key to Time season is Graham Williams' strongest is mainly down to the fact it is the most consistent out of the three. I'm by no means saying that it's perfect and without fault, but the level of qualities with the stories for the most part is maintained. You could argue that the consistency only starts to drop off with parts of the Power of Kroll, and absolutely by the time we hit the Armageddon Factor. This, though, is helped by the story arc of the Key to Time to maintain the consistency throughout the 6 stories, as without that focus, some of the stories would drop in quality. Equally, though, I feel that the decision to vary the importance of the search of the segments in the narrative is a wise move by the writers and production team to maintain freshness. The way I also see it is that the quality of the stories can basically be divided between the first half and the second half of the season. The Ribos Operation, The Pirate Planet and Stones of Blood offer 3 very different narratives in terms of setting, style, humour levels and dependence of the hunt for the segments. The Androids of Tara, The Power of Kroll and The Armageddon Factor are slightly weaker overall, which I feel is slightly unfortunate towards The Androids of Tara, which is a fun story, but its reliance on the prisoner of Zenda knocks it back slightly. Power of Kroll has all the best intentions, but that just falls short, whilst The Armageddon Factor unfortunately ends the season as a damp squib and was a mistake to make it a season 6-parter. The Armageddon Factor is the biggest tarnish on the Key to Time season, and I feel it could have been more of a success if the narrative had focused more on the Black Guardian and had him more involved, as well as not trying to set an epic narrative that could never be realised with the budget's allocation. This is a season all about human-like antagonists, and given the difficulty to realise a lot of the alien-like characters such as the Ogre and Kroll, it is a good decision to use these interesting concepts as merely narrative hooks, and ultimately as a side stage for the human and believable villains. It would have been nice seeing another season from Mary Tamm as Romana, given that she was starting to make a foothold, with a notable impression of the character designed as intelligent but out of her depth, whilst trying to compete with the Doctor on the intelligence levels. And from Mary Tamm's point of view, standing out with the screen time shared with Tom Baker was always going to be a tough act to upstage. However, with Romana evolving and finding her footing, it is unfortunate that Mary Tamm saw it as the character falling into a traditional companion role, and would be interesting to see how her approach to Romana would have been managed with season 17 and 18 scenarios that Lalla Ward's interpretation of the character managed. In the end, to me, the Key to Time might not be the best of Doctor Who, but it certainly isn't the worst. But it is full of variety, and most importantly, it is fun. But tell me what you think. Maybe you think differently, but that is the beauty of Doctor Who. It branches out with so many preferences of storyline, because the show is full of variety and full of fun. For now, it's the end, but the moment has been prepared for.